I'll never forget how silent Michigan's forests get after dark. That kind of silence doesn't feel like peace. It feels like warning. My name's Travis Moore. I'm 42 years old, and I've been living out of my RV for nearly 6 years now. I've seen almost every kind of landscape this country has to offer. Red rock deserts, high mountain passes, the ghost towns of Nevada. But nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to the kind of fear I felt in Michigan. I wasn't planning to stay long. I was just cutting through the Upper Peninsula that summer, looking for a quiet spot to fish and camp for a few nights before heading west. I'd heard about a campground not far from Manistee, small, quiet, tucked between two lakes. Locals said it was untouched, but later I'd learned that word means something different up here. Sometimes untouched just means forgotten. The road to it wasn't even paved. My tires kicked up gravel and dust until the trees swallowed me whole. Michigan's woods feel old, like they're not just growing, but watching. Pines so tall they blot out the sky, birches clustered close enough to look like faces in the dark. You start to lose your sense of direction. Even the GPS stopped updating after a while. It just froze. My RV icon stuck there like it had hit a wall of static. That's when I first started to feel it, that weight behind the quiet, like something was aware of me before I even parked. When I finally reached the campground, it was empty. 4 sites, no ranger station, just a weathered sign half buried in ferns. The letters were barely legible, but I could make out the name Dead River Bend. You'd think that would have been my cue to turn around, right? But I'd been driving for 9 hours straight and the air smelled like rain. I told myself it was fine, that I'd just spend one night, get some rest, and move on. I parked near the edge of the water. The lake was black glass, so still it reflected the tree line perfectly, except for one patch that looked darker as if the reflection had been burned away. I didn't think much of it at the time. When night came, the quiet deepened. You could hear the hum of your own blood in your ears. Then came a sound that made me freeze. A splash. Not from fish. It was heavier, like someone wading in, slow, deliberate. I shined my flashlight, but the beam only hit mist. My breath fogged the window, and that's when I saw something move. Tall, slow, pale, just beyond the shore. The next morning, I told myself it had to be an animal, maybe a heron, maybe my tired eyes playing tricks. But the footprints near the waterline said otherwise. Bare feet, human. Long toes that had sunk deep into the mud. I packed up fast, but before I could pull out, an old Ford pickup rolled up the dirt road. Out climbed a man who looked like he'd been carved out of driftwood. Thin, sun-leathered skin, gray beard, eyes that never blinked. He asked if I'd seen anyone walk through the night. When I said no, he just nodded once. "Then don't go looking," he said. "That's how it starts." I laughed it off, but something about the way he said it, quiet, certain, stuck with me. He told me he used to work for the DNR, that Dead River Bend wasn't supposed to be open anymore. "They closed it years ago after the drownings," he said, glancing at the lake. "But folks still find their way in. The woods pull 'em back." I asked what drownings he meant. He didn't answer. Just said, "If you hear your name tonight, don't answer it." Then he got in his truck and drove away without looking back. That night, the rain came hard. I lay in my bunk, listening to it hammer the roof, but between the downpours, I could swear I heard something tapping on the side of the RV. Soft, like knuckles against metal. Tap, tap, pause. Then again. I turned off every light, grabbed my flashlight, and crept to the window. Nothing. Just black water and fog. Then, faintly, through the rain, I heard it. Someone calling my name. "Travis." The voice was low, distant, like it came from underwater. I froze. My throat tightened. The sound came again. Closer. My instinct screamed to answer, to say, "What?" But the man's words echoed in my head. "If you hear your name, don't answer it." So I sat there in the dark, holding my breath, counting each second like a prayer. When I woke at dawn, the tapping had stopped. The rain had washed away the footprints near the lake. But there was something new pressed against my door. A single wet handprint, long fingers splayed wide, palm facing inward. That was the moment I knew. Something out here wasn't just watching. It wanted in. I didn't pack up that morning. I should have, but I didn't. You ever feel that strange pull toward danger, that mix of dread and curiosity that makes you want to look closer, even when everything in your gut says run? That's how it felt. The air had this still heaviness to it, like it was holding its breath with me. The forest smelled different too. Wet earth, moss, and something faintly metallic underneath. I tried to shake it off. I brewed coffee on the stove and opened the door, expecting maybe a raccoon or deer would dart off. Instead, the lake looked like it hadn't moved in hours. The same patch of water where the reflection didn't match was still darker than the rest, like a hole cut out of the surface. When I walked down to the shore, I noticed something else, my tire tracks from the night before. Gone. Even the mud where I'd stepped had smoothed over, as if the ground had healed itself overnight. That's when I heard it. A distant whistle. Faint, slow, 3 notes. It came from deep in the trees behind my RV. It wasn't a bird, too measured, too human. I turned, scanning the woods. The birch trunks looked like a crowd standing still, all pale faces turned toward me. I called out, "Hello," but my voice fell flat. The forest swallowed the sound, not even an echo. I forced myself to laugh, told myself it was just some hunter, maybe a hiker. But the sound came again, this time closer. Same 3 notes, but wet, like someone whistling with a mouthful of water. That's when I finally decided to leave. I threw everything in the RV without organizing it, cords tangled, drawers half open, coffee still steaming on the counter. I turned the key, engine growling to life, and felt relief for a second, until I noticed something on the passenger seat, a wet footprint. Human. Bare. Facing inward, I froze. My breath turned shallow. The door was locked. I knew it was locked. I checked it before bed, but that footprint was fresh, water still beating in the indent of the toes. I started driving without thinking. I didn't care where. I just wanted distance. The forest road wound endlessly, twisting through identical walls of pine. My GPS still wouldn't move, and the trees pressed closer the farther I went. No cell service. No signs. After maybe an hour, I saw something ahead. A wooden bridge, old and narrow, spanning a black creek. The planks looked soaked and warped, but it was the only path forward. I slowed down, leaning out the window to check stability. That's when I saw movement underneath, pale fingers gripping the beam from below, slow and deliberate. I slammed it in reverse, heart hammering, nearly clipping a tree behind me. I don't even remember turning the RV around. Just the sound of gravel spitting from under my tires as I tore back the way I came. But after maybe 15 minutes, I saw it again. The bridge. Same water, same warped planks. That's when the panic really hit. I kept driving, took every turn that wasn't blocked, but no matter what, I came back to that same creek. The forest was looping me, or my mind was breaking. I killed the engine and just sat there shaking. The forest was silent again, too silent. That's when I saw her. Standing on the far side of the bridge, a woman, hair hanging wet over her face, arms at her sides. Her clothes were old, flannel shirt, long skirt, soaked to her knees. She wasn't moving, just looking. I called out, "Do you need help?" No answer. Then, slowly, her head tilted, not a nod, more like something curious, studying. And when the hair shifted, I saw her face wasn't right. The mouth stretched too wide, and her skin, it wasn't smooth. It looked rippled, like water trying to hold a shape. I floored it. Straight through the woods. I didn't care about the road anymore. Branches cracked across the windshield. I just kept driving until sunlight broke through, and I hit pavement again. When I finally reached a gas station miles later, I stumbled out, mud up to my knees, shaking so bad I dropped the fuel nozzle twice. The attendant, an older woman with tired eyes, asked if I was coming from Dead River Bend. I didn't answer. I didn't want to say the name out loud. She sighed and said, "You shouldn't have stayed there overnight. It's the lake, you know. It doesn't like to give people back." I asked what she meant, and she told me the story. Half local legend, half truth. Back in the 1960s, there was a family that went missing there. Husband, wife, 2 kids. Their RV was found empty by the shore. doors locked from the inside. The only sign of them was a set of footprints leading into the water, all four hand in hand that stopped mid-lake as if they'd stepped off into air. Since then, people have reported hearing their names whispered from the woods. Sometimes it's a loved one's voice, sometimes it's their own. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in my RV in the parking lot, staring at my reflection in the window. And for a split second, I swear the reflection blinked after I did. That was the last time I camped in Michigan. But even now, years later, sometimes when I park too close to a lake, I'll hear it again. That faint, wet whistle. 3 notes. Always followed by silence so deep it feels alive. And I know I left something behind in those woods. Or maybe something followed me out. For weeks after leaving Michigan, I couldn't sleep through the night. Every creak in the RV made my heart skip. Every sound of dripping water made me check the windows twice. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, convinced I could still hear that whistle from the woods. People say trauma fades, that the mind heals in time. But the thing about Michigan, about that place, is it doesn't let go. It stains the air in your lungs. I could be parked in the middle of Arizona's desert, hundreds of miles from a drop of water, and still smell that metallic lake bed rot if I closed my eyes too long. I kept telling myself it was exhaustion, that maybe I hallucinated. But a few weeks later, while camped outside Marquette, I stopped at a laundromat. An old bulletin board hung by the door, covered in faded missing person flyers. One caught my attention, a man about my age, missing since 2021. Last seen at Dead River Bend Campground. Same smile, same kind of RV as mine. I felt a chill crawl up my spine when I saw the date he disappeared. August 14th, the same day I arrived. I left the laundromat and sat in my van for nearly an hour, staring at nothing. The world outside was bright, summer air shimmering over the asphalt, but I couldn't shake the cold in my hands. Because, the way that flyer was worded, last confirmed sighting, parked alone near the East Lake shore. That was my spot. Part of me wanted to go to the police, tell them what I saw, the woman on the bridge, the handprint, the looping roads. But what would I say? That a lake whispered my name? That the forest tried to keep me? I couldn't even prove I'd been there. My GPS still didn't record the route. It was blank from the moment I turned down that dirt road until I reached the highway again. So I did what I always do. I kept moving, but you can't outrun what's in your head. A few nights later, I camped by Lake Superior. The sound of the waves lulled me for a while, steady, rhythmic, but around midnight, the water went flat, perfectly still. I don't even know why I looked up. Maybe I felt it, the pressure in the air shifting, that same silent tension from before. And across the dark water, I saw something faint, a light. It flickered once, twice, like someone waving a lantern from the shore opposite mine. I thought maybe it was another camper. But then, slowly, I realized the shoreline there was miles away. Still, the light grew brighter, closer, gliding over the surface without reflection. My throat went dry. I stepped back, hand trembling over the door handle. The light stopped at the edge of the water. Then it flared, just enough to show what stood inside it. Something tall, dripping, featureless, except for that faint ripple pattern across its body, like the shape I saw before, but clearer now. More human. It didn't move toward me. It just stood there, watching. I don't remember getting back into the RV, only that when I blinked again, the dawn was bleeding over the horizon and the lake was calm as glass. My footprints from the night before were gone. That morning, I drove straight out of Michigan. I didn't stop until I crossed into Wisconsin, where the pines thinned and the air felt light again. I pulled over, walked to a rest stop bathroom, and looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection stared back. Same tired eyes, same stubble, but something was off. My shirt was wet at the hem, not sweat, not rain. Cold, lake water damp. I remember gripping the sink, whispering to myself, "You're out, you're fine." But even then, I could hear something faint just under the hum of the fluorescent light, the echo of my own voice, repeating the same words. "You're out, you're fine." But I wasn't sure anymore if it came from me. That was 3 years ago. I haven't been back since. But I've talked to enough RV travelers across the Midwest to know I'm not the only one who's felt something wrong out there. People vanish every year in those woods. No headlines, no explanations. They say it's the weather, wild animals, accidents, but the ones who come back, the few who do, they all say the same thing. The forest doesn't just take you. It asks first. And the question always starts with your name. So if you ever drive north through Michigan, if you find yourself deep among those black pines and mirrored lakes and you hear someone call for you, don't look, don't speak, don't even breathe until it passes, because the woods out there, they remember. And once they've whispered your name, they don't ever forget it. I remember the first night the desert went completely still. Not quiet like when the wind pauses or the insects go silent, but a deeper kind of stillness. The kind that presses on your chest until you realize you're the only thing making noise. My name's Evan Mitchell, 34 years old, and I'd been on the road for almost 3 months by then, moving west through the old fire roads that thread across the Arizona high desert. The plan was simple: photograph what was left of the old Forest Service infrastructure before summer hit full swing. The towers, the cabins, the weather stations, no one visited anymore. It was supposed to be a quiet trip, a way to reset after too many years in the city. But that first night near the Mogollon Rim, parked under the skeleton of a fire watch tower, something about the silence didn't feel right. The air had that dry weight it gets before a dust storm, the kind that smells faintly like metal and electricity. My RV sat just off an old service road, one of those narrow, sun-baked paths that looked more like a scar than a road. I'd spent the afternoon hiking a few miles up to what the map labeled Cabin 27F, an old firewatch post supposedly decommissioned in the early 90s. It looked intact from a distance. A single-room cabin perched on a sandstone rise, shutters hanging crooked, the antenna long gone. What caught my eye wasn't the structure itself, but the faint orange glint in one of the windows. It looked like light. I told myself it was just reflection, maybe a bit of glass catching the sunset. Still, it stuck in my head all evening as I cooked dinner outside my RV and watched the horizon fade from rust to violet. The desert cooled fast, and by the time the last light drained out of the sky, I could see the silhouette of the cabin faintly against the ridge. There shouldn't have been any electricity up there. No generators, no lines. Yet as the stars came out, I could swear that same orange glow flickered once more behind the broken window pane. I'm not the kind of guy who chases ghost stories. My dad was a smoke jumper, and I grew up around people who spent their lives in backcountry stations, sleeping with radios and weather charts. They used to talk about the weird things you saw after too long alone, the lights, the shapes, the noises that seemed to echo from nowhere. The woods will talk back if you stay too long, he'd say, usually with a half smile. I'd always assumed the desert would be quieter, cleaner, but that night, as I lay in my bunk with the windows cracked open and the stars overhead, the silence outside started to feel crowded, like something out there was listening just as intently as I was. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of gravel shifting, just a single, soft crunch. I lay still, eyes open to the dark, trying to tell if it was an animal. The nearest town was 40 miles away. The only thing that should have been moving out here were jackrabbits and wind. But this sound was deliberate, slow, rhythmic. A few steps, then a pause, another few, closer. I reached over and killed the small battery fan humming near my bed, letting the silence flood in. The steps stopped. Then came 3 sharp clicks, metallic and hollow like something striking wood. I told myself it was the tower settling, the wind pushing against a loose panel or rung. Still, I sat up and looked through the side window. The desert was silver in the moonlight, the scrub brush throwing long, sharp shadows. Nothing moved. But up on that ridge, the cabin window pulsed again, faint, steady, orange. Someone had lit a lantern. By morning, I had almost convinced myself I'd dreamed it. The heat hit early, the kind that bakes through metal before breakfast. I brewed coffee on the small propane burner, checked my tires, and told myself I'd hike up to the cabin after sunrise just to prove it was empty. Part of me wanted the mystery. I'd been driving for weeks through landscapes that all felt the same. Empty, vast, indifferent. Maybe I needed something to feel alive again. Or maybe I just needed to be sure there wasn't someone else out there. The trail up to the cabin was steeper than it looked. Every step kicked up a puff of red dust that clung to my boots and made my throat feel like sandpaper. Lizards darted under rock edges, and the occasional gust sent a dry whisper through the brush. The closer I got, the more it felt like walking towards something private, something that hadn't been disturbed in years. When I reached the top, I realized the door wasn't locked. The padlock hung open, rusted through. Inside, the air was stale and heavy with the smell of ash. A metal cot leaned against the wall, its springs sagging. A single wooden chair sat near the window where I'd seen the light, and on the floor beside it was an old kerosene lantern. Its glass was fogged, soot crusted along the rim. What caught my breath wasn't the lantern itself. It was the fact that the wick was still blackened at the tip, like it had been burned recently. I crouched beside it, touching the metal. It was cold. The window beside me looked out over the desert plain, endless and quiet. No sign of footprints, no sign of anyone, just heat and silence. On the far wall, someone had etched a line of tally marks into the wood, hundreds of them, some overlapping, some carved deep as if in anger. That's when I heard it again. A sound outside, faint, dragging, like something brushing against the gravel. I turned toward the door, but before I reached it, a sudden gust slammed it shut. The entire cabin seemed to exhale. I froze, my pulse spiking as dust swirled around my boots. For a long moment, there was nothing but the wind. Then, from just beyond the wall, came 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I didn't move for a full minute. The knocks hadn't been loud, just measured and oddly hollow, like someone using the back of their knuckles on an old plank. I waited for them to repeat, but they didn't. Just the faint moan of wind threading through the cracks in the siding. When I finally pushed the door open again, the sun was glaring down so bright I could barely see. The desert spread out below. No footprints, no tracks, nothing. It was like the sound had been swallowed up by the heat itself. I stepped outside and circled the cabin, scanning the ground for anything. A shape, a shadow, even disturbed dust. There was nothing. The only sign of movement came from a few black moths that fluttered weakly against the sunlight, trapped beneath the eaves. I went back inside, this time noticing something I'd missed before. A half-empty canteen on the counter, the kind the Forest Service issued decades ago with a faded stencil that read, "Property of FS." It shouldn't have been there. The reports said this post had been decommissioned after a lightning strike in '93. No one should have been using it since. I took a few photos, mostly to ground myself. The cot, the marks, the lantern. But each shot looked off, like the light inside didn't match what was outside. It had that amber tint you get near sunset, even though it was barely past noon. That unsettled me enough to start back down the trail early, but halfway to the RV, I stopped. Something was different. The desert around me had gone unnaturally quiet again. No wind, no insects, just a low hum in my ears, the kind you get before a storm, except there wasn't a cloud in the sky. By the time I reached my RV, the temperature had climbed into triple digits. The metal door was hot enough to burn my hand. I climbed inside, started the engine, and cranked the air, but it blew nothing but warm dust for a minute straight. I sat there with the windows rolled up, staring out at the ridge where the cabin stood. I didn't see the light this time, but the shadow of the place seemed wrong. Too sharp, like the sun was bending around it. I told myself I was dehydrated, that the heat was getting to me. I drove a few miles south, found a stretch of half-paved road, and parked under what little shade a juniper could offer. By late afternoon, the air had shifted again. A wall of dust was moving in from the horizon, thick enough to smear the sun. I decided to stay put for the night, figuring it was better to ride out the storm than try to drive blind through it. As I set up, I realized I hadn't checked my radio all day, an old CB I kept mostly for emergencies. I flicked it on, half hoping for chatter from truckers or park maintenance. What I got instead was static, and then beneath it, a faint voice. At first, it sounded like wind through broken glass, indistinct, warped by interference. Then it cleared just enough to hear, "Cabin 27, flare report, confirm." The voice was male, flat, official sounding, and it looped twice before fading back into static. I leaned closer, adjusting the dial, but it was gone. That designation, Cabin 27, was exactly what had been marked on my map. The coordinates were miles off any active Firewatch network. No one should have been transmitting from there. As the dust storm rolled in, I locked the RV and watched through the windshield. The world turned copper, visibility dropping to a few feet. The air filled with the hiss of grit against metal. I could feel it in my teeth. Somewhere beneath that noise, I thought I heard the radio click again. Once, then twice, like someone keying the mic without speaking. The sound came and went with the wind until it finally stopped. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. When the storm finally passed, the sky was a strange bruised purple. The desert looked scoured clean, all sharp edges and long shadows. That's when I saw it again, the light. This time it wasn't a flicker. A steady, unwavering orange glow burned in the cabin window on the ridge. It shouldn't have been possible. The fuel in that lantern was probably dust by now. Yet there it was, bright enough to cut through the haze. I felt my stomach twist. Every rational thought said to stay put, drive away in the morning, forget it. But the part of me that had spent years chasing remote places, the part that hated not knowing, wouldn't let go. I told myself I'd just go up there once more, quickly. Maybe someone had moved in, a squatter or another traveler. Maybe they'd need help. I grabbed my flashlight and a canteen, checked the time, just after 8, and started up the trail again. The heat had bled away, leaving the air cool and dry, but there was a faint smell of something burnt, like metal and sagebrush. Halfway up, the wind picked up behind me, and I heard what sounded like a door hinge creaking ahead. I turned off the flashlight, letting my eyes adjust to the dimness. The glow from the cabin was steady, flickering just slightly, enough to show the doorway standing open. When I reached the top, I hesitated. The air around the cabin felt charged, like standing too close to a live wire. I called out, "Hello, anyone here?" But my voice died against the walls. No answer. I stepped inside, and the first thing I saw was the lantern, burning low on the floor where I'd left it earlier. It wasn't new. The metal was the same, the soot marks unchanged. It was just lit. A faint trail of smoke curled from the wick, filling the room with that sharp kerosene scent. The chair near the window had been moved. Now it faced the door, and on the seat lay something I hadn't seen before. A small, spiral-bound notebook, edges curled from heat. The cover was stamped with the old Forest Service emblem. I picked it up carefully, brushing away dust. The first page was dated 1989. The entries were written in tight, small handwriting, and they all followed the same pattern. July 3rd, winds steady, smoke in the east, flare reported near Canyon Ridge. Light kept on through night. Dozens of entries just like that. Then about halfway through, the tone shifted. The notes got shorter, more fragmented. Light still on, no confirmation, can't leave post, someone outside. A chill ran through me despite the heat still clinging to the air. I flipped further. The last entry was a single line scrawled deep into the paper. "If anyone finds this, don't answer the knocks." The lantern hissed softly beside me, flame dancing as if stirred by breath. I stood frozen in the cabin, the notebook open in my hands, the words blurring slightly as if my brain refused to process them. "Don't answer the knocks." It shouldn't have carried the weight it did. Just 5 words scrawled by someone who'd probably spent too much time alone, but I felt them sink deep, right into that quiet place where instinct lives. The air had gone still again. Even the soft flame inside the lantern seemed to pull back, as though holding its breath. I set the notebook down on the chair and turned slowly toward the door. The desert outside was black now, moonless and hollow, and in that thick dark, the edges of everything felt too close. I could feel the silence pressing against the open doorway like a held-in lung. I wanted to get back to the RV before my nerves decided for me. I reached for the lantern, meaning to snuff it out, but the second my fingers brushed the handle, I heard it. 3 knocks. Slow. Heavy. From the outer wall. It wasn't a dreamlike sound this time, not a trick of wind or wood. The whole structure gave a small, deliberate shudder. I froze, my hands still on the lantern. The knocks came again, closer now, almost like something dragging its knuckles along the boards. Then silence. My throat tightened. I whispered a shaky hello before I could stop myself, hating the sound of my own voice in that room. There was no answer, just a faint rhythmic tapping now, like something brushing lightly against the window. The notebook's last line flashed in my head again. Don't answer the knocks. I stepped backward, pulse hammering, trying to quiet my breathing. I waited for the tapping to stop, but instead it grew softer, more measured, as if it was following me from outside the wall. I moved toward the door, my every step careful, slow, and when I finally crossed the threshold, the night hit me like a physical weight. The air smelled wrong, not like dust or sage, but damp, earthy, as if it had just rained. The kind of smell you only get after a monsoon, except there hadn't been a drop of moisture in weeks. I turned off my flashlight and crouched low, listening. The desert was black and soundless except for the faint rasp of the wind through the grass. For a moment, I convinced myself the sound had been the cabin settling. That's when I saw the footprints. They were faint in the dust, leading away from the door. Human, barefoot, smaller than mine. The prints went only a few yards before stopping abruptly, as if whoever made them had simply vanished mid-step. The ground beyond was undisturbed. I started back down the trail, forcing myself not to look behind me. Each crunch of gravel under my boots echoed too loud in the still air. Somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard the faint crack of a branch. Impossible in a place where nothing grew tall enough to break. I didn't run until I saw the dull shape of my RV through the darkness. Inside, I locked the door and sat for a long time with every light on, waiting for my pulse to settle. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and even when I tried to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing, the smell of kerosene still clung to my shirt. Around 3 a.m., I must have drifted off, but the dreams were worse. Flashes of orange light, the sound of distant knocking, like a voice repeating something I couldn't understand. When I woke, the sun was bleeding up over the horizon, washing the desert in that pale gold that makes everything look harmless. I almost laughed at myself for getting spooked. Almost. Until I saw what was sitting on the ground outside the RV door. The notebook. I had left it on the chair inside the cabin. It was resting neatly against my step, dust-free, as though someone had just placed it there moments before dawn. I stared at it through the glass for several minutes before I opened the door. The pages fluttered in the wind, and I realized a new entry had been added in the same cramped handwriting, fresh ink that glistened faintly in the morning light. Light still on. New watcher arrived. My stomach turned. I slammed the door and started the engine. I didn't even bother to check my surroundings. The tires kicked up clouds of dust as I tore back down the service road, not caring about the ruts or rocks. All I wanted was distance, miles between me and that cabin. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't truly left it. The desert around me looked the same, endless and hollow, but the shadows on the ridges seemed to shift just a little slower than they should have, as if something was watching me move through its territory. I didn't stop until I reached a small service station near Holbrook, where the clerk eyed me warily as I stumbled in. I looked like hell, covered in dust, eyes red, shirt still stained from the desert night. I asked if there were any old fire posts near the canyon roads north of the rim. He frowned, thought for a second, then said, "Not anymore. Those towers got shut down after the big lightning season in '93. Why?" I told him I'd seen one still standing with a cabin beside it. He hesitated. You mean the one with the light? Yeah, people say it still flickers sometimes up there after dark, but that place burned down a long time ago. He looked at me then, squinting like he was gauging whether I was serious. You didn't go inside, did you? I didn't answer. I just backed away, muttered something about getting back on the road, and left. His eyes followed me the whole way out, like he wanted to say something more, but decided against it. That night, I parked at a rest stop 100 miles west, unable to shake the feeling that I could still smell smoke inside the RV. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that light, steady, unblinking, waiting. I told myself I'd drive all the way to California, trade the desert for the ocean, let the salt air wash this thing off me. But around midnight, as I sat in the driver's seat staring at the highway stretching into darkness, something flickered in my side mirror. A faint orange glow, far off. In the reflection, it looked like it was coming from the ridge behind me. I told myself it was nothing, just the glow of a truck's taillights bouncing off a rock face somewhere down the highway. But deep down, I already knew the truth. The color was wrong. It wasn't red or amber like a sodium lamp. It was that same molten orange, the exact hue of kerosene flames seen through dirty glass. I killed the RV's engine and sat in the quiet watching the mirror. The glow pulsed once, faintly, as if acknowledging me. Then it went out. Sleep didn't come easy. The desert has a way of amplifying every sound when you're alone. The creak of metal cooling, the shifting sand, the far-off howl of wind moving through arroyos. It all blends into something alive, something thinking. Around 2 a.m, I heard the faint tapping again. Not on the door this time, but under the RV. Slow, measured. I held my breath, counting each tap. 3, pause, 3 more. I reached for the flashlight, but stopped halfway, afraid of what I might see. The tapping continued, soft as fingertips on sheet metal, then faded. When I finally worked up the nerve to look outside, the desert was empty. But the ground beneath the RV was marked by 3 neat lines drawn in the dust, like someone had dragged their fingers there and left them half-finished. By sunrise, I'd decided to end the trip. I drove straight west, no stops, barely looking at the scenery. It was supposed to feel like escape, heat and light swallowing the memory of that cabin. But with each mile, the air grew heavier, more electric, like the whole desert was waiting for me to admit something. I stopped only once in a town that barely existed anymore, just a strip of old motels and boarded-up shops. I filled up the tank, bought a bottle of water, and was about to leave when I noticed a map tacked up near the counter. It was an old fire district chart from 1991, yellowed and curling at the corners. My eyes went straight to the upper quadrant, and there it was again. Cabin 27F, circled in faded red marker. But what froze me wasn't the cabin. It was a small note scrawled beside it in pen, maybe added years later. Light observed again. Site under review. Personnel unaccounted for. I asked the clerk if he knew anything about the mark on the map. He barely looked up. Those firewatch posts, they're all gone, he said. My uncle used to work one of those towers back in the 80s. Quit after a storm took out half his unit. Said weird things started happening up there after dark. Radios picking up voices, that sort of thing. He paused, his expression tightening. Said the worst thing you could do was answer if someone came knocking. Why do you ask? I left before he could finish, too aware of how my hands were shaking. I drove until the desert gave way to scrub plains and the sky began to bleed gold with sunset. But even then, I couldn't shake the sense of being followed, not by a person, but by something unseen, threading itself through the radio static, through the low hum of the tires on asphalt. When I stopped for the night, I parked facing the open desert instead of the road. I wanted to see what was out there, if anything was coming. That night, I dreamed of the cabin. Only it wasn't burned or abandoned. It was alive again, lantern glowing bright through the window, the tall fire tower beside it rising like a black spear into the stars. I stood at the base, watching the light pulse slowly, like it was breathing. Then a voice drifted down from the tower, low, deliberate, familiar. It said my name, not shouted, not whispered. Just said it once, as if calling roll. I woke up gasping, the desert night thick around me, my skin damp despite the cold. The clock read 3:17. I sat up, heart hammering. Outside, the air was dead still. But through the window, far beyond the reach of my headlights, I saw it again. A faint orange shimmer on the horizon. It looked miles away, yet it flickered with that same rhythm, that same steady, knowing beat. I tried the radio again, mostly to drown out my thoughts, but as soon as I turned the dial, the static shifted into something else, a low hum, then a voice cutting through, warped and distant. Cabin 27, flare confirmed, watcher in place. It repeated twice before the signal broke into white noise. My mouth had gone dry. I shut off the radio, grabbed the notebook from the passenger seat, and flipped to the last page. The ink from that final line, "New watcher arrived," had smudged slightly, as if someone had run their thumb over it while it was still wet. For a long moment, I sat staring at it, feeling the heat of the desert pressing in, the air inside the RV tightening. Then, from outside came the sound I'd been dreading. 3 knocks. This time they came from the back door. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The knocks came again, perfectly spaced, perfectly calm, as though whatever was out there had all the time in the world. Then a soft, dragging scrape, like something tracing the edge of the metal frame. I reached for the ignition, praying the engine would turn, but when I twisted the key, nothing happened. Just a dry click. The lights flickered once, then died. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then I heard the faint hiss of kerosene, unmistakable and close, as if the lantern's flame were burning inches from the wall. The smell followed, that sharp, sweet chemical scent, and with it, the smallest flicker of orange reflected across the window pane. It wasn't outside the RV anymore. It was right behind me. I turned slowly, every muscle in my body braced. The light filled the cabin of the RV, flickering gently, casting long shadows that moved like water. There was no source, just air, shimmering with color, pulsing faintly as if it had a heartbeat. Then a voice spoke, the same even tone I'd heard on the radio, only now it was inside the room, level and close. Watcher confirmed. The light blinked out. The air went dead, and in that heavy darkness, I realized the knocking had stopped only because whatever had been outside was already in. When I came to, if that's even what you could call it, the sun was pouring through the windows, and the desert stretched empty in every direction. The engine started on the first turn. The notebook was gone. I told myself it had been a hallucination, a night terror brought on by exhaustion. But as I drove west, I saw the smoke, a thin column rising from somewhere out near the horizon, too isolated to be anything but a structure burning. I didn't stop. I didn't even look directly at it. But through the corner of my eye, I saw the faintest pulse of orange one last time, steady and patient, like a beacon marking the place I'd never escaped completely. Even now, months later, I still wake at 3:17 every night. The air in the room feels wrong, too warm, faintly metallic. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I swear I can see that light flickering behind my eyelids, waiting for me to notice. I try not to, because I know what happens when you do, and I know better than to answer the knocks. I've learned the hard way that you don't pack for comfort when you're driving into the unknown. You pack for silence, the kind that swells between the trees when your headlights click off, the kind that asks questions you can't afford to answer. My name's Ely Mercer, 38, from northern Arizona. I travel alone now, ever since my last trip convinced me that not every noise in the night belongs to an animal, and not every shadow outside your Volkswagen is a trick of the lantern. I bought my 78 VW Westphalia 6 years ago, a sun-bleached green van that smelled of pine resin and engine oil. She rattled over every mile like a stubborn memory. People said the van looked tired. I thought it looked patient, like it was waiting for something. Maybe that's why I kept driving west every season, deeper into the national forests, chasing stories of other campers who swore they'd heard voices where there shouldn't have been any. I told myself it was research, maybe even therapy. After my brother disappeared near Flagstaff 3 years ago, I needed explanations, even the impossible kind. The plan for that autumn was simple: film a survival guide series for my small YouTube channel, Road Minded. But this episode wasn't about tents or tires. It was about what you pack for the things that don't explain themselves. That's what I titled it before I left. Unseen Threats, What RV Campers Pack for the Unexplained. It sounded catchy, marketable, safe. The first stop was the Mogollon Rim, a stretch of ponderosa forest so vast it feels like the world just ends in green. I set up camp on a bluff overlooking a gorge that fell into miles of blue shadow. The air smelled sharp, cold, a kind of clean that cuts through thought. By dusk, I'd recorded my intro. How to prepare for emergencies, how to secure your camp, how to stay calm when nature tests you. But as the camera light blinked red in the twilight, I realized I didn't believe any of it. Because calm wasn't what the forest wanted from me. The wind changed sometime after midnight. I woke to the van rocking slightly, a rhythmic sway like someone pushing from outside. I told myself it was the gusts rising from the gorge, but then I heard it. 3 slow knocks on the metal siding, evenly spaced. Not violent, just deliberate. Tock, tock, tock. I held still. The engine ticked with cooling metal. I tried to count my breaths. Then it came again, closer this time, like knuckles dragging along the panel. My flashlight was within reach, but my hand wouldn't move. Something in me whispered that if I turned on the light, I'd see it, whatever it was, and the world would be different after that. When I finally did move, it wasn't bravery, just the instinct to prove my fear wrong. I yanked the curtain aside and aimed the beam. Nothing. Only pine trunks swaying and a sea of fog spilling up from the gorge. But the knocks had left a mark. 3 small smudges on the paint, oily, almost like fingerprints. I filmed them in the morning, made a joke into the camera. Even the ghosts here leave handprints. My laugh didn't sound real. I should have packed more sleep, I said, or less imagination. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had taken inventory of me that night. My habits, my hesitations, my breathing, as if I were being measured. That's when I started writing my unofficial list. Not the one for viewers, but the one for myself. The real packing guide. 1. The quiet flashlight. One with a rubber switch that doesn't click when you turn it on. You don't want sound giving you away. 2. A mirror. Not to look at yourself, but to look behind yourself. Sometimes reflection is safer than turning around. 3. Something alive to remind you what's normal. For me, it was a small cactus I kept on the dash. Its spines pointed toward the sun every morning, proof the world still obeyed some laws. That list grew over the next few nights as I moved north toward the White Mountains. Every mile carried the same strange pulse, like a pressure in the air, a low hum you don't hear so much as feel against your ribs. I'd roll down the window to find its source, but it vanished each time I stopped. Only when I drove did it return, like something pacing me just beyond the tree line. Locals at a small gas station near Greer noticed my van right away. "That old Westie's been up there before," the attendant said, wiping his hands. "Back around 94, a couple from Albuquerque drove one just like it. Didn't make it out till spring thaw." He smiled like it was gossip, but his eyes didn't. "You camping alone?" "Yeah," I said, pretending to check tire pressure. "Filming a safety guide." "Then remember," he said, leaning close, "not every trail is meant for folks with cameras." The way he said trail sounded like a warning, not advice. By the 4th night, I'd parked in a meadow of dead grass surrounded by aspen trunks, white, skeletal, whispering when the wind scraped through. I cooked instant noodles on my camp stove, wrote notes for the video, and tried to convince myself the story would help people stay safe. The irony wasn't lost on me. Then, somewhere between sips of coffee, I noticed the reflection in my side mirror, something tall and pale, half hidden between trees. I froze. The shape didn't move, didn't sway with the wind. I raised my camera, zoomed, hit record. The frame caught only static and the soft strobe of my own pulse. When I lowered the lens, the shape was gone. But in its place stood a single aspen trunk with a black handprint smeared across it. 3 fingers, spaced just like the marks on my van. That's when the lesson changed. It wasn't about preparedness anymore. It was about recognition, understanding that not all dangers come from the outside world. Sometimes they follow the places you go because you've already carried them inside. I turned off the camera that night. The fog came back thicker than before, curling low around the van like breath. The forest seemed to listen, and for the first time, I realized silence can sound exactly like waiting. The next morning, frost clung to the windows like a thin layer of breath. I wiped it with the back of my hand, expecting to see only the meadow and the aspens beyond. But on the glass, beneath the condensation, was a faint outline, like someone had pressed their face to the window while I slept. A nose, lips, and the shallow indent of 2 eyes. I stepped back so fast I knocked over my camp mug, scalding my ankle. I didn't care. I just stood there, breathing in sharp gasps, staring at the faint human imprint on the glass. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I filmed. The camera had become both my witness and my anchor. I set it up on a tripod inside the van, facing the windshield, recording while I sat in silence. My voice was low, steady, rehearsed. When you're out here long enough, you start to realize survival isn't about the tools you pack. It's about what your mind chooses to ignore. The sound that repeats when the wind isn't blowing, the reflection that changes shape when you blink. The fog returned around midnight. This time it wasn't rising, it was descending, dropping down the slope like it was being poured from the sky. My headlights cut only a few feet ahead, and the world beyond became soft and colorless. The hum came again, the same deep pressure I'd felt before, pulsing beneath the noise of the forest. I turned off the ignition and waited, holding my breath until I heard it, a voice, faint but deliberate, calling from the trees. It said my name, not shouted, whispered as if the forest had known it for years. Eli. I almost laughed. It had to be an echo from one of the videos I'd recorded earlier, maybe the sound bouncing back through the trees. But it came again, closer. Same tone, same syllables, like a question. Eli. I flicked off the flashlight and crouched by the door, straining to hear. There was no rustle, no footsteps, nothing but the pulse of the wind. Then something brushed against the van, a slow, sliding drag, as if fingertips were tracing the length of the metal. I held still, every nerve screaming not to look. The knock came next, softer this time, just once. A single wordless reminder, I'm still here. When dawn broke, I drove without eating, without filming, without even looking in the mirrors. Every few minutes I caught glimpses of movement through the trees, pale streaks darting between trunks, but I refused to stop. I told myself I'd head toward civilization, maybe show low, maybe beyond. But something about the highway felt wrong. The signs were familiar yet altered. Distances didn't add up. I'd driven an hour east, yet somehow the landscape looked the same. Same trees, same bend in the road, same fallen log by the ditch. That's when I realized the van's compass needle hadn't moved in miles. By afternoon, I found a clearing with an old Forest Service shed and decided to rest. The place looked abandoned, padlock broken, shingles curling like dead bark. I parked close, opened my journal, and tried to reason with myself. Isolation does this, I whispered in the recorder. Fatigue blurs detail. Fog alters orientation. This is what stress looks like. This is normal. I repeated it until the words lost meaning. But when I played back the audio later, there was a sound under my voice, a low breathing, wet and uneven, like someone exhaling right into the microphone. I hadn't heard it while recording. I checked the windows, the doors. Everything was sealed. The cactus on my dash had fallen over, soil scattered across the mat. Its roots were split down the middle, like something had pulled it apart. That night, I made a new rule for my unseen threats list. 4. Don't pack denial. It weighs more than fear. I forced myself to keep recording. Fear could rot your logic faster than hunger. If something is out there, I said into the lens, then it wants one thing, to be acknowledged. The second you pretend it isn't real, you give it room to grow. The van's interior lights flickered once and died. Total blackness swallowed me. I heard the creak of the shed door outside, like metal hinges whining in protest. The air inside thickened, damp, heavy with the smell of earth, like a freshly dug hole. I crawled forward and pressed my ear to the van floor. Silence. But then, faintly from below, a scraping noise, rhythmic, deliberate. It was coming from beneath the van. I froze. The sound grew, a dragging like fingernails against metal, then a pause. Then 2 knocks. I knew that pattern. It had followed me since the first night. I reached for the ignition. Nothing. The key turned, but the engine didn't even click. My breath fogged the air. Something brushed against the floor again. Closer now, scraping beneath where my knees pressed. I couldn't think. I just grabbed the flashlight and leapt outside, scanning the ground beneath the van. Nothing. Only soft mud, marked with long grooves, as if someone had been lying on their stomach, crawling in circles around the van. The grooves led into the fog, disappearing under the shed. The rational part of me, the part that still believed in patterns, in reason, wanted to inspect the shed to prove it was an animal, maybe a stray dog. But the human part, the survival part, whispered something else. Do not look where the noise lives. I backed away, climbed inside, and locked every latch twice. I didn't film again that night. I didn't even write. I just listened to the fog press against the windows like a tide trying to find its way in. When morning came, the shed was gone, not collapsed. Gone. Just grass and disturbed soil where it had stood. My tracks from the night before ended at the edge of a dark circle of earth. Everything else, my footprints, the grooves under the van, had been smoothed out, as if someone had wiped the land clean. That's when the real suspicion set in. Not that something was following me, but that it was learning. It had watched me lock the doors. It had watched me film, write, analyze. And now, it was mimicking the one thing I relied on most, my preparation. By the next stop, a dry lake bed outside Alpine, I noticed signs of it everywhere. A small fire ring identical to mine, built with the same number of stones, a mug same color as mine, left half buried in the dust, even a folded map weighted by a rock. My route was circled in red. That night, as I packed my gear, the realization hit. I wasn't just being followed. I was being rehearsed. Someone or something was running through my routine step by step, refining it like it was preparing to become me. So I added one final note to the list. 5. If the forest starts acting like you, it's already too late to run. By the time I reached the edge of the San Carlos Apache lands, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I told myself it was the caffeine, or maybe the lack of sleep. But deep down, I knew it was that crawling awareness, the sense that I was no longer leading this trip. I was being led. The forest had changed. The trees here were thicker, their bark darker, as if charred by a long-ago fire. The air carried that same faint metallic smell I'd noticed since the first night, the smell of wet iron, like the moment before a lightning strike. Every few minutes I'd glance at the mirrors, half expecting to see headlights behind me, but the roads stayed empty, as if the whole world had thinned down to just me, the van, and that quiet, watching wait in the distance. At a wide pull-off by a dried creek bed, I finally stopped. I hadn't eaten in nearly a day, and my stomach was cramping. I forced myself to boil instant rice on the stove, watching the bubbles rise and burst like tiny, frantic breaths. The van creaked with the shifting air. It almost sounded like someone walking on the roof, slow, careful, measured. I killed the burner and listened. The steps stopped too. I whispered, "You're hearing your own fear echo." Then, as if in answer, something whispered it back. My exact words, but thinner, breathier, like they'd been dragged through water. "You're hearing your own fear echo." I slammed the pot shut. My breath caught in my throat. The sound had come from outside, near the passenger side. I forced myself to peek through the curtain. Nothing, only the dense blue light of dusk and the sway of trees. But then I saw movement in the reflection of the windshield, something pacing parallel to my van, moving as I did, step for step. When I froze, it froze. When I leaned closer, it leaned too. The only difference was that its face was a little too pale, a little too long, and its mouth didn't close when mine did. The grin lingered, wide, unblinking. I backed away and grabbed my camera. I needed evidence, something real to hold on to. I hit record, pointed the lens toward the windshield, and spoke. My voice was low, trembling but controlled. If anyone finds this footage, if I don't upload again, know that I wasn't alone. Something followed me. It knows me. I stopped to breathe, then added, and it's getting better at pretending. The air inside the van shifted, like a door had opened somewhere behind me. I turned slowly. The back hatch was still locked, but the curtains swayed inward as if someone was exhaling through it. My flashlight rolled off the counter and clattered onto the floor. I grabbed it, flicked it on. The beam hit the back wall and froze. Someone had drawn on it. 3 words smeared in what looked like mud, or worse. Pack for me. I stumbled back so fast I hit my head on the cupboard. My pulse was hammering in my ears. That phrase, pack for me, it made no sense, and yet I understood exactly what it meant. It wanted my things, my habits, my logic. It was building a version of me, piece by piece. I turned the key ignition. This time, the engine roared to life like it had been waiting. I floored it, tires spitting gravel, headlights cutting through mist. The road twisted down the slope, shadows shifting in the corners. The radio crackled to life even though it hadn't worked in months. Through the static, my own voice came through, one of my recordings from earlier in the trip playing back distorted. Not every trail is meant for folks with cameras. I ripped the dial out of the dash. The voice didn't stop. It moved outside, echoing from the forest like a broken announcement over loudspeakers. Every word I'd spoken into the camera since the start of this trip came back to me, echoing from somewhere unseen, a collage of my own advice turned inside out. Stay calm when nature tests you. Silence can sound exactly like waiting. Don't pack denial. It was all there, all overlapping, each line a little more warped until it just became a single drawn-out whisper. Elay, Elay, Elay. The headlights flickered. My knuckles ached from gripping the wheel. The van's interior lights began flashing in sync with the sound, like a warning. Then the road ended. Not a junction, just ended. The asphalt crumbled into dirt, then into raw earth the way old roads do when they've been erased from maps. I slammed the brakes, the van fishtailing to a stop. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was crowded, thick. Something was standing just beyond the headlights, half in shadow. I couldn't make out its face, only the glint of something metallic hanging from its hand. A mirror. My mirror. The one I kept above the dash. It tilted the glass slightly and the beam of my headlights bounced back, blinding me for a moment. When I blinked, the figure was gone, but the mirror lay in the dirt, face down. I stepped out slowly, gravel crunching under my boots. The fog rolled in again, heavy and slow, wrapping the van in a gray cocoon. I reached for the mirror, hand trembling, and flipped it over. My reflection looked back, but it wasn't delayed. It moved a half second too early, smiling before I did. That's when the panic finally broke me. I dropped the mirror and ran. The forest swallowed me in seconds. My lungs burned, heart pounding, feet slipping in the wet leaves. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew that if I turned back, I'd see myself watching me run. The whispers followed, now multiplied. Hundreds of faint voices, all saying my name in different tones, like every version of myself that had ever doubted, ever hesitated, ever ignored instinct. The sound grew until it filled the air, the ground, the space inside my head. I tripped on a root and hit the dirt hard, my flashlight skittering ahead. The beam landed on something ahead of me, a campsite, my campsite. Identical, same van, same fire ring, same tripod with the same camera still recording. I stumbled toward it, half crawling, half crazed. The screen on the camera was lit, replaying footage from minutes ago. Me sitting inside, whispering the words, "If anyone finds this footage, know that I wasn't alone." Only in this version, I never turned the camera off. The video kept going. The door behind me opened, and something walked in. I froze, unable to look away, watching as the figure leaned close to the lens and whispered, "Now you are." The camera fell sideways, showing only feet, 2 sets, both wearing my boots. I turned around. The fog had thickened, the air humming like live wires, and standing there, illuminated by my dropped flashlight, was me. Not a ghost, not a hallucination, just me, smiling that too-wide grin, head tilted, eyes calm. "Pack for me," it said again, voice steady as it stepped closer. The first thing I remember is running until the world stopped sounding like my heartbeat. I don't know how far I went, half a mile, maybe more, but the fog followed. It wasn't natural mist anymore, it was heavier, moving in gusts that changed direction, closing off paths that moments earlier had been open. When I finally stopped, I realized I couldn't even hear the forest. No wind, no insects, no night birds. Just that faint vibration in the air, a sound without a source, humming like a warning that was too late to heed. My lungs burned, my vision blurred, and still, somewhere behind me I heard footsteps, my own rhythm, perfectly mirrored. I turned, half expecting to see nothing, half hoping to see a person, anyone. But what stood in the fog looked like a silhouette carved out of shadow. My height, my build, my posture, even the same headlamp, glowing faintly through the haze. It moved when I moved, it stopped when I stopped. I whispered, "Why me?" And for the first time it answered, "Because you don't stop looking." Its voice was mine, not an imitation, mine exactly. I wanted to scream, but my throat closed up. The fog around it pulsed like breath, and I realized what it was carrying. Every word I'd ever recorded, every sound I'd made on this trip. I'd fed it my voice, my fear, my patterns. It wasn't mimicking me, it was growing from me. It stepped closer, and the air dropped 10 degrees in an instant. The smell of wet iron came again, sharper, with the scent of pine sap and rot. My flashlight flickered, then steadied, and I saw its face. My face, but hollow, like it had been stretched thin over something that didn't quite fit inside. Its smile didn't reach the eyes, those were just dark pits that reflected everything except the light. I did the only thing left that felt human. I ran back to the van. When I reached it, the headlights were already on, shining through the fog like two small suns. The engine was running. I hadn't left it that way. My bag sat on the ground beside the door, half unzipped, contents spread neatly. Mirror, flashlight, knife, first aid kit, notebook, compass. My unseen threats checklist, all lined up, waiting. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and peeled out. The tires spun mud and stones. The headlights cut through streaks of white, revealing glimpses of trees, road, then more fog. But behind me, no, around me, the reflection in the windows moved out of sync. I could see myself in the glass, gripping the wheel, mouth open in a scream I hadn't made yet. I don't remember how long I drove. The odometer ticked, but the scenery didn't change. Every few minutes I'd catch sight of something familiar on the roadside. A fire ring, a mug, a mirror half buried in dirt. Like the world was looping, resetting, copying itself from memory. At some point, exhaustion overpowered panic. My mind shut down, instinct taking over. I focused on one thing, drive toward light. And eventually, there it was, an orange glow through the trees, not fire, but steady, constant. Civilization, maybe. A ranger station, a gas stop, anything human. I pulled into the clearing and stopped dead. Rows of Volkswagen vans, identical to mine, lined the clearing in perfect formation. 10, maybe 12 of them, all green, all with the same faded paint, same cracks in the glass, same dent in the rear panel. Their headlights were on, engines idling quietly, synchronized like a heartbeat. My stomach turned. My reflection in their windshields multiplied into 1,000 copies, each one smiling just a little too early. The door of the first van creaked open. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own bag. The air shimmered, bending light around the rows of vans until I couldn't tell which one was mine. I heard the engines rise in pitch, that humming sound swelling like a chorus, and from every open window came the same whisper layered over itself. "Pack for me." I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Every sound followed, the low hum of engines, the crunch of gravel, the wet breath of something that had learned how to breathe my air. I sprinted through the trees until I reached a ridge and collapsed. Below me, the fog wreathed across the forest floor, swallowing the light from those vans one by one. That's where I recorded my final entry. The phone battery was almost dead. I leaned it against a rock, hit record, and tried to keep my voice steady. This isn't a guide anymore. It's a warning. The things you pack, they learn you. Every item you trust becomes a mirror. The light you depend on, the camera you use to stay sane, it's all memory to something that's been watching longer than we've been camping out here. Maybe it's not the forest that's haunted. Maybe it's the habits we bring into it. I look down at my hands, dirt under my nails, skin pale, trembling. I could still feel the van's vibration in my bones. I didn't know if it was real or just memory replaying itself. If you're listening to this, I said, voice breaking, never camp where the fog holds shape. Never chase echoes that sound like your name. And for the love of whatever's left in you, never pack to prepare for what you don't understand, because that's exactly how it finds you. The recording ended there, mid-sentence, as if the battery cut out, but somehow the video uploaded anyway. They say it appeared on my channel 2 weeks later, time-stamped, titled exactly as planned, Unseen Threats, What RV Campers Pack for the Unexplained, 2025. The footage was shaky but clear. Me, sitting in the van, smiling into the lens, talking calmly about survival, about mindfulness, about staying safe in the wild. Only if you listen closely, underneath the sound of my voice, you can hear another one, breathing along with me, whispering the words before I say them. And in the final frame, as the video fades out, my reflection in the van's window looks straight into the camera and mouths one last sentence that I never recorded aloud. I'm packed. Are you? I used to think that the woods were only dangerous when you stopped respecting them. That's what my father always said when I was a kid, sitting in the back of his old Volkswagen Westphalia, somewhere along the redwood coast of Northern California. Respect the woods, and they'll respect you. I used to believe that meant if I didn't litter, didn't start fires, didn't act like an idiot, the forest would leave me alone. But I've learned that sometimes the woods watch you back, and respect has nothing to do with it. It was early October when I decided to take a week-long solo camping trip in my own Volkswagen, a 1978 orange Westphalia I'd restored over 2 years. I'd quit my job in San Jose after burning out from 12-hour days, and I told myself I just needed air. Trees. Silence. The kind of silence you only find on the coast where fog licks the road and everything smells of wet earth and salt. I'd planned a route up through Mendocino, then into Humboldt, camping off Highway 101 where the redwoods rise like cathedral columns. I wanted to feel small again, grounded, reminded that the world didn't revolve around Wi-Fi and deadlines. The first few nights were peaceful. I parked at small, nearly empty campgrounds off Forest Service roads, cooked on my little propane stove, and slept with the back hatch cracked open so I could hear the ocean far below. Sometimes fog rolled through the canopy and settled like ghost breath around the van, but it felt calm, cleansing. It wasn't until the fourth night that I came across the place that would change everything. It wasn't marked on my map, just a narrow gravel spur road off the main highway, choked with ferns and branches barely wide enough for the van. A wooden sign half swallowed by moss read Totem Ridge. Something about it felt inviting, maybe because I hadn't seen another soul all day. I turned off, driving slowly over potholes and fallen needles until the trees opened into a clearing. There was an old picnic table, a rusted fire ring, and beyond that, a massive redwood that dwarfed the others. It looked ancient, thicker than a truck, its bark rippled with time. But what caught my attention was the carving. Someone had carved a face into the trunk. Not just a small marking, an enormous, detailed totem face staring outward from the bark, maybe 10 feet tall. The eyes were hollowed sockets, deep and black. The mouth a jagged oval that seemed to smile or grimace depending on how the light hit it. I stepped closer and felt something strange. Not fear, not exactly, but a pressure, like standing in front of something that had been there long before me and would be there long after. There were offerings beneath it. Small things, a stack of smooth river stones, a feather, a bit of old rope tied in a loop. I crouched, half curious, half unsettled. Who would do this way out here? There was no sign of other campers, no footprints, no tire marks, only that carved face and the faint sound of the wind threading through the redwoods. That night, I cooked dinner beside the van, trying to ignore the totem's shadow stretching toward me as the sun went down. I told myself it was just art, maybe a local tribute or an old native carving someone restored. The forest grew darker than I expected, the kind of dark where even the campfire feels swallowed. I sat in my folding chair watching sparks vanish into the fog. Then, just past midnight, I heard it, a slow knock. It wasn't loud, not like someone rapping on metal, softer, deeper, like wood against wood. I sat up in the van, holding my breath. The sound came again, 3 times, evenly spaced, then silence. I turned off the interior light and peered through the window. The fire had long since burned down to embers, and everything was motionless. I waited, every muscle tense. Then, knock, knock, knock. This time closer, maybe 20 feet from the van. I couldn't see anything through the fog. My rational brain said it could be a branch falling or an animal bumping something, but I didn't hear movement. No steps, just that deliberate rhythm. I lay there for an hour, listening, but it never came again. When dawn broke, I got out and checked the area. Nothing seemed disturbed. I even looked at the totem, half expecting to see new marks or scratches, but it was unchanged. Its hollow eyes staring toward the clearing as if mocking me for worrying. I should have left then. I told myself I'd drive out after breakfast. But I didn't. I convinced myself I was overreacting, that it was just part of the camping experience. Sounds in the night. I'd come here to face silence, hadn't I? So I stayed another night. That evening, as the fog crept in early, I found myself drawn back to the carving. I don't know why. There was something mesmerizing about the craftsmanship, how human it looked despite its scale. I noticed faint symbols etched around the face, circles intersecting lines nearly erased by weather. I brushed away moss and dirt to reveal more patterns. They reminded me of old tribal markings I'd seen in a museum once, but mixed with something else, something geometric, unnatural. I took a photo on my phone and zoomed in, but the details blurred, like the camera refused to capture it clearly. When night came, I kept the fire burning longer. The air was heavy, the smell of damp earth thick. Around 10, I heard faint movement, not the knocks this time, but something brushing the ferns near the edge of the clearing. I shone my flashlight and caught a glimpse of what looked like a person, or maybe just a shape, standing among the trees. "Hello?" I called. My voice sounded small. The beam hit trunks and fog, but no one answered. I waited, the flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. Then, as if mocking me again, came the same rhythm. Knock, knock, knock. This time echoing faintly through the trees, moving from one side to the other like something circling the camp. I slammed the van door shut and locked it. The knocks grew fainter, but they didn't stop for hours. Sometimes it came from the left, sometimes behind me, always in threes. Eventually, sometime near dawn, exhaustion took over and I drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep. When I woke, there were handprints on the back window. They weren't clear, smeared, almost like mud or sap, but they were definitely human. 5 fingers, long, uneven, some overlapping as if several hands had pressed there. I checked the doors, the ground, everything. No footprints, no sign of anyone. I left that morning, drove down the gravel road faster than I should have, my tires kicking up mist and gravel until I reached the main highway again. I told myself I wouldn't stop until I reached Eureka. But about 5 miles down, something in my chest started to twist. A feeling I can't describe. Like leaving something unfinished, like walking out of a room before turning off the lights. I pulled over on the shoulder, breathing hard, staring back into the trees behind me. That's when I realized I hadn't taken the photo off my phone. And when I opened my gallery, the picture wasn't there anymore. I stared at my phone screen for a long time, convinced I'd simply misplaced the file or deleted it by accident. But when I checked the photo folder, the only image there was one I hadn't taken, a blurred, grayish shot of what looked like the inside of the van at night. It was faint, like it had been captured with almost no light, but I could make out my sleeping bag, the edge of the rear window, and in the upper corner, the faint outline of a face reflected in the glass. It wasn't mine. I dropped the phone, my chest tightening. My first thought was that someone had somehow used my camera while I slept, some kind of sick prank, but I hadn't seen another person for days. No other vehicles, no campers, no footprints near that clearing. The photo's metadata said it was taken at 3:12 a.m., which matched the time I'd been lying half awake, listening to those knocks. I couldn't make sense of it. I drove on, trying to focus on the road, but the forest pressed close on both sides, dark and endless. Every curve felt like it was pulling me back toward that place. I stopped for gas in Trinidad, and when I went inside to pay, the cashier, an older man with gray hair and tobacco-stained fingers, glanced at my van and asked where I was headed. When I told him I'd been camping near a place called Totem Ridge, his face changed. He didn't say anything for a few seconds, just shook his head slowly. "Totem Ridge?" he muttered. "You shouldn't go up there alone. That's old land. People used to carve watchers into those trees a long time ago." "Watchers?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. He leaned on the counter. "Old stories. Coast tribes had totems they believed held eyes of their gods, guardians, protectors, whatever you want to call them. But when the settlers came, they said those eyes turned dark. Folks started carving new faces to keep the old ones quiet. Some say, if you disturb the wrong one..." He didn't finish. He just shrugged and gave me my change. I laughed it off then, trying to sound casual, but his words stuck to me like sap. That night, I parked at a state-run campground closer to the coast, near the ocean cliffs. There were other campers around, a few vans, some tents, and for the first time in days, I felt safer. I set up a small fire, cooked dinner, and watched the sun sink into the fog-drenched horizon. For a moment, it felt like I'd left Totem Ridge behind, but when I crawled into the van to sleep, the air inside smelled different. Damp. Earthy. Like the clearing. I sat up, shining my flashlight around. Nothing looked out of place, but there was a faint residue on the floor near the back hatch, like dirt mixed with pine needles pressed into the mat. My heart pounded. I told myself it could have been from my boots, or maybe I'd tracked it in earlier, but when I bent down and touched it, it was cold, wet, almost sticky. I cleaned it up, trying not to think about it, but when I lay back down, I couldn't stop imagining that carved face, those hollow eyes. I finally drifted into a fitful sleep, the van rocking slightly in the ocean wind. At some point in the night, I heard whispering. It wasn't clear, just faint sounds, like someone speaking from far away, the syllables stretched by the wind. I sat up, my pulse hammering, and realized the whisper was coming from the rear of the van. I turned slowly and saw that the back hatch, which I'd locked, was slightly open, just a crack, but enough for the fog to curl through like smoke. I grabbed the latch and slammed it shut, checking it twice, 3 times. The whisper stopped. The next morning, I found a feather stuck to the rear window, black and gray, wet with dew. I almost threw it away, but something made me hold on to it. Maybe curiosity. Maybe fear. It looked like the same kind of feather I'd seen under the totem. I decided to cut the trip short. The drive south was quiet at first, but as the miles went by, I started to notice things. Faint shadows flickering at the edge of the tree line, movement that disappeared when I looked directly at it. I kept telling myself it was fatigue, that my mind was playing tricks, but every few minutes that same pressure would return. The sense that I was being watched. Somewhere near Garberville, the van began to sputter. I checked the gauge, half a tank. The engine coughed again, then died completely. I coasted onto the shoulder, surrounded by towering trees, their tops lost in mist. I popped the back to check the engine, but everything looked fine. I tried the ignition again. Nothing. Dead. That's when I saw the marks. On the rear panel, just below the window, someone had dragged their fingers through the layer of road dust. 5 long streaks. Like the handprints from before, but cleaner, more deliberate. My breath caught in my throat. I looked around. Nothing but silence and trees. Not even birds. I locked myself in the van and waited. Hours passed. The fog thickened until it felt like the world outside had vanished. Every sound became magnified. My breathing, the ticking of the cooling engine, the faint creak of the van shifting on its suspension. Then, somewhere out there in the fog, I heard it again. Knock. Knock, knock. Not on the van this time, somewhere out in the woods. Deep, resonant, like someone tapping on a tree with a hollow log. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. It echoed faintly through the forest, slow and patient, as if whatever was making it knew I was listening. I didn't sleep that night. I sat behind the wheel until dawn, gripping the steering column like a lifeline. When the light finally came, weak and gray, I tried the ignition again. It started on the first turn. I drove straight to a mechanic in Leggett. He checked everything, said the van was fine, maybe just moisture in the distributor cap from the fog. I nodded, pretending to believe him. Before I left, he pointed at the feather sitting on my dash. "You camping up near the old ridges?" he asked. "Yeah," I said carefully. He frowned. "You might want to leave that thing out here. Some places, it's better not to take souvenirs." I dropped it in the trash on my way out, but even as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't mattered. Some things, once they find you, don't stay behind just because you leave the woods. That night, back at a motel off Highway 1, I finally felt ready to sleep in a real bed. But when I turned off the lights and lay down, I saw it again. The totem's face burned into the back of my eyelids, those empty eyes, watching. And faintly, from somewhere deep in the timbered dark outside, a slow, rhythmic sound began to echo through the wind. Knock, knock, knock. I sat up in bed, heart hammering, half expecting to see someone outside the motel window. But there was nothing. Just the neon sign outside bleeding red light through the curtains and the sound of the highway far off, trucks moving like ghosts in the mist. I told myself it was imagination, that maybe the pipes in the old walls were expanding or that I'd carried the sound in my head like an echo that wouldn't die. Still, I couldn't shake the rhythm. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 more, always slow, deliberate, like it wasn't trying to scare me, only to remind me it was there. When morning came, I packed up and left the motel without breakfast. My hands shook as I turned the van's ignition, but it started cleanly. I told myself I'd drive straight home, no more back roads, no detours. The redwoods had turned from sanctuary to something else, something alive, something that knew me now. The farther I drove, the more I tried to convince myself it had all been exhaustion and coincidence. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. By the time I reached the stretch of coastal highway near Fort Bragg, the fog had thinned and the sun broke through in streaks of gold. The ocean shimmered to my right, waves slamming the cliffs below. For a few hours, I felt almost normal again. The air smelled of salt, the van hummed, and I caught myself humming along to an old cassette Father used to play on our trips north, Fleetwood Mac, their voices rolling through the cabin like a memory I could still trust. Then, around noon, something strange happened. The radio, though it wasn't even turned on, crackled faintly. Just static at first, then a faint hum like feedback bleeding through the speakers. I turned the dial to make sure it was off. It was. But the hum grew louder, rising and falling like a distant chant carried on the air. It had rhythm, and beneath it, something that might have been a voice. I turned off the van and listened. The sound didn't stop. For a long minute I sat there, engine off, surrounded nothing but the sound of the surf and that low, whispering pulse coming from the speakers. Then, suddenly, silence. Dead, heavy silence that made my ears ring. I reached to start the van again, but when I looked out the windshield, I froze. Someone was standing on the side of the road about 50 yards ahead. At first, I thought it was a hitchhiker. A tall figure, long coat, head tilted slightly forward. But something about the stillness was wrong. They weren't moving, not even when a gust of wind blew across the road. I squinted, trying to see their face, but the light hit them in a way that turned their features into shadow. The longer I stared, the less human they seemed. Their arms hung too low, their shape too narrow, like bark stretched over bone. A car came from the opposite direction, and for a second its headlights cut across the figure. But when the car passed, the person was gone. I didn't wait. I slammed the van into gear and drove. Hours passed in a blur. I stopped only once for gas, and even then, I didn't look anyone in the eye. I just wanted to get home. Back to walls, light, noise, something man-made and solid. By the time I reached my driveway in San Jose, the sky was turning amber. The van's engine clicked as it cooled. For the first time in days, I felt safe enough to exhale. I showered, made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and stared at my hands. They were trembling faintly. I told myself I'd unpack tomorrow, wash the van, maybe sell it. I wasn't sure I wanted to keep it anymore. The woods had marked it somehow. That night, as I tried to sleep, I dreamed of the totem. Not just its face this time, but the entire clearing. The moss, the ring of ferns, the way the fog moved like something alive. In the dream, I was standing before the carving again, but it wasn't still. The wood was breathing, the grooves pulsing as if the tree itself had a heartbeat. I tried to back away, but my feet sank into the soil like mud. The mouth of the totem began to move, widening, the hollow eyes turning toward me, and from that mouth came a sound that wasn't quite human, a whisper of my own name, drawn out and layered with dozens of other voices. I woke gasping, drenched in sweat. The room was silent except for my own breathing. I turned on the bedside lamp and reached for my phone, half expecting another image to appear in my gallery. But what I saw was worse. The lock screen background had changed. I don't know when it happened, but the photo now showed that same carved face, clearer than I'd ever seen it. The mouth stretched open in a grin I didn't remember. I dropped the phone, my pulse racing. I tried resetting it, deleting the image, anything. It wouldn't go away. Every time I tried, the screen would flicker, the image distorting and then reforming again. For the next few days, I barely slept. Every sound felt amplified. A knock at the door, the creak of the floorboards, even the ticking of the clock. It all came in that same pattern. 3 beats, a pause, 3 more. By the 4th night, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag and drove out of the city, telling myself I was going to prove it was all in my head. I'd go back to the clearing, see it in daylight, and maybe then I could let it go. Rationalize it. The drive north felt longer this time. The fog came earlier, thicker. The trees leaned closer to the road. When I finally reached the turnoff for Totem Ridge, the sign was gone. Only a rotted post remained, jagged where the wood had split. But I recognized the road. I turned anyway. Branches scraped the sides of the van as I crawled forward. The road looked different, narrower, darker, the air heavier somehow. When I reached the clearing, my stomach dropped. The totem was gone. The space where it had stood was nothing but bare trunk, smooth and unmarked. No carvings, no offerings, no sign that anyone had ever touched it. The picnic table was collapsed, half swallowed by ferns. It was as if the place had been abandoned for decades. I stepped out of the van, every instinct screaming to leave, but I forced myself closer to the tree. The air was cold still, but when I laid my hand on the bark, it felt warm, almost like skin. I don't know why I whispered to it. Maybe desperation, maybe madness, but I said, "I came back. What do you want from me?" For a moment, nothing. Then from deep within the trunk, a faint vibration, like something shifting. A whisper rose from the hollow earth around me, and though I couldn't understand the words, the rhythm was unmistakable. 3 beats, a pause, 3 more. The forest around me began to move, not with wind, but with breath. The trees seemed to lean closer, their shadows merging. I stumbled back toward the van, tripping over roots, my pulse hammering. The air grew thick, the fog swirling until it filled the clearing completely. As I reached the driver's door, I looked up one last time. The totem was back. Its eyes were open now, and this time they were looking directly at me. I froze there, one hand on the door handle, the other shaking so bad I could hear the keys rattling. I didn't breathe. I didn't even blink. The fog swirled around that massive trunk, and those carved eyes gleamed with wet light, like something behind the bark was alive and pressing forward to see me better. The air smelled of rot and rain-soaked earth. I took a step back without meaning to, my heel sinking into the mud, and the old van's metal groaned beside me like it was holding its breath too. Something about that face was different now. The carving wasn't just wood anymore. It seemed to have depth. The eyes no longer hollow, but filled with some kind of darkness that pulsed. I don't know how to explain it, except to say that I could feel those eyes moving. Not the wood itself, but something behind it, watching from inside the tree. Watching me. Then came that sound again. Slow. Dull. Knock. 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 Only this time, it wasn't from the woods. It came from inside the van. I spun around, heart slamming in my chest. The driver's side window was fogged over, my own reflection a smear of pale panic. The sound came again, softer now, from inside, like something tapping the metal from the rear compartment. I forced the door open and climbed in, breath coming fast, shining my flashlight toward the back. The light hit the rear hatch, and my stomach twisted. There were new handprints, clearer than before, like someone had pressed their palms there moments ago. Wet streaks trailed down from each one, dark against the orange paint. I backed toward the front seat, fumbling for the keys, but when I jammed them into the ignition, nothing happened. Not even a click. The knocks came again, this time from outside, low and heavy on the rear panel. 3. Pause. Then silence. I sat there shaking, every nerve screaming to run, but I didn't move. The flashlight flickered, dimmed, then went out completely, leaving me in darkness so thick it felt physical. I could hear my own heartbeat, rapid and uneven. Then a whisper came from the passenger seat beside me. It said my name, just once, soft, almost kind. I turned my head slowly, afraid of what I'd see. But there was nothing there. Only the faint shape of the seat, the empty air. Still, the voice lingered in the space between my ears, echoing as though it had been spoken not around me, but through me. I don't know how long I sat there before something inside me snapped and I bolted. I threw open the door and ran into the fog, the cold air slicing through my lungs. The forest around me looked endless, every direction the same. But I didn't stop running until I couldn't hear the knocks anymore. When I finally did stop, gasping, bent double in the mud, the fog began to thin just enough that I could see the shapes of the trees again. And that's when I realized where I was. I'd run in a circle. The van sat 20 yards away, its headlights now glowing weakly, though I hadn't turned them on. Through the windshield, the cabin light flickered once, twice, then steadied. There was something sitting in the driver's seat. At first, I thought maybe it was my reflection again, warped by the fog, but the figure didn't move when I did. It just sat there, head tilted, hands resting on the steering wheel like it belonged there. I took one step closer, then stopped. The figure turned its head toward me. That's when I ran again, blindly this time, crashing through underbrush, branches tearing at my arms. I don't know how I found my way out of those woods. Maybe the slope of the land led me downhill. Maybe instinct just dragged me forward until I stumbled onto a gravel road and collapsed. I lay there until I heard a distant engine, a ranger truck coming from somewhere beyond the fog. The ranger found me shaking, mud up to my knees, eyes so wide he asked if I'd been in an accident. I told him I'd gotten lost, that my van had broken down somewhere on Totem Ridge. When I mentioned the name, his face went blank for a moment before he told me quietly, "There's no road called that anymore. Haven't been for 30 years. He gave me a ride to town. I filed a report for a missing vehicle, though even as I described where it was, I could tell he didn't believe me. Maybe he thought I'd hallucinated from exhaustion or gotten turned around in some logging tract. But 2 days later, they called me back to say they'd found the van, or what was left of it. It had been discovered several miles from where I said I'd been, half buried in silt at the edge of a dried creek bed. The engine was rusted solid, though I'd driven it less than a week earlier. Every window was shattered inward. The strange part, they said, was the wood fragments scattered throughout the cabin, splinters of redwood, some carved, some burned, some still wet with sap. When they showed me the photos, my stomach dropped. On the dashboard, among the fragments, was a small piece of bark carved with a single eye. That was 3 months ago. I haven't driven since. Sometimes, late at night, when the neighborhood goes quiet, I still hear it. The same rhythm, faint but clear. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. It comes from the walls, or maybe the pipes, or maybe it's just inside me now, echoing like something that doesn't know how to die. I've learned something since then. Respect doesn't protect you from the woods. Neither does fear. Because some places don't want your respect. Some places just want to be remembered. And when you do, when you see what you weren't meant to see, they remember you back. I still live near the coast, not far from the old forests, though I haven't gone camping since that night. My Volkswagen sits in a rented garage covered by a gray tarp, engine gutted. I tell myself I'll restore it again one day, but every time I touch the key, I feel that same cold pulse rise through my chest, the memory of something older than time, waiting in the fog. I've spent too many nights trying to make sense of it. At first, I searched for logic. I read about pareidolia, hypnagogic hallucinations, forest acoustics. I convinced myself that maybe the knocking was just the echo of woodpeckers or thermal contraction, the handprints just condensation, the voices a product of exhaustion. But no matter how many explanations I built, one truth remained. That rhythm followed me home. The knocks weren't just sounds, they were attention. They were something answering back. I stopped playing music for a while, stopped cooking. I'd wake up to the creak of the floorboards, the whisper of wind through the vents, and every sound carried the same cadence. I'd press my palms over my ears and count. 1, 2, 3. Pause. 1, 2, 3. It wasn't constant. It came and went like a tide, but I could feel it waiting. Sometimes it felt almost gentle, like it was reminding me not to forget. Other times it came in the middle of the night so loud I'd sit upright in bed, heart pounding. Every light in the house flicked on. I started walking at dawn, down to the cliffs where the fog lifts first. There's something about the ocean that balances things, the endlessness of it, the way it refuses to hold shape. I'd stand there until the sun broke through, until the sound of waves began to erase that pattern in my head. Some mornings I swear I hear birds echo it, or the creak of the pier groaning in that same rhythm. But it doesn't scare me the way it used to. It's just part of the world's breath now. The thing about fear is that it changes you. It strips you bare. It shows you what you believe in when there's no one left to convince but yourself. I thought I went camping to escape my life, to clear my head, to be alone with something simpler. But the truth is, I went because I was trying to feel small again, to find meaning in something bigger than my burnout, my loneliness, my need to control everything. The forest gave me that, just not in the way I expected. There are nights I still dream of the totem. It's always the same clearing, always that same cold mist wrapping the air like gauze. Sometimes the carving is gone, sometimes it's there, but smaller, like it's shrinking back into the tree. And sometimes it's standing in the open, detached from the trunk entirely, watching. Not angry, not vengeful, just present. Once a few weeks ago, I dreamed I walked right up to it again. The fog was thick, and my own voice sounded like it came from somewhere else when I said, "I'm not afraid of you anymore." The totem didn't move, it just looked at me. Then I heard the knocking, soft this time, almost human. 3 beats, pause, 3 more. But it wasn't a warning, it was acknowledgement. When I woke, I realized something. Fear and reverence feel a lot alike. The difference is what you do with them. I don't tell people this story often. When I do, I leave out the worst of it. Most folks wouldn't understand. They think of the woods as beautiful, not as something capable of remembering. But I know now that memory lives in everything: wood, stone, fog, sound. You leave pieces of yourself behind in places like that. And sometimes, if you listen long enough, the place sends something back. A few days ago, I drove the coast road again. Not north, but far enough that the redwoods started to appear in the distance, their silhouettes rising through the fog. I didn't stop, but for the first time in months, I rolled down the window and let the cold, resin-scented air rush in. And I swear, beneath the engine's hum, I heard something faint, far off, buried in the wind. Knock, knock, knock. It didn't feel like a threat this time. It felt like a reminder, a heartbeat, a call from something vast and old and patient. Maybe it's still out there in those woods, whatever carved its memory into that tree. Maybe it's part of the land now, or part of me. Maybe that's the same thing. All I know is this: the world is deeper than we pretend it is. Every silence has a voice if you listen long enough. Every shadow has a name if you stay until dark. And when the fog rolls in and the trees start to move like they're breathing, I remember what my father said all those years ago. Respect the woods, and they'll respect you. But now I know what he really meant. He didn't mean don't disturb them. He meant don't forget that they're alive, because the moment you do, they'll remind you. And if you're lucky, that reminder is only a sound. Knock, knock, knock. The rhythm of something ancient, still watching, still waiting, somewhere out there in the redwood mist. I've always said that camping alone doesn't scare me. People do. But that was before I learned what waits quietly beyond the circle of firelight in America's forgotten campgrounds. My name's Eli Morin, 43 years old, born in Oregon, raised on asphalt and pine air. I've spent more than half my life behind the wheel of my old Volkswagen Westphalia, tracing roads that most folks forgot were even paved. I make my living filming campsites for a travel channel, recording the way dusk folds into silence, how fog gathers like memory around the trees. But lately, what I've been capturing hasn't been beauty. It's been evidence, proof that something's wrong out there. I don't mean ghosts or aliens or anything that sells t-shirts. I mean the kind of wrong that feels alive, something that notices you back. I started collecting stories a few years ago, real stories, not internet campfire talk. They came from rangers, truckers, solo campers. Each one started the same way. You ever been to that place where the map don't match what you see? I'd laugh, nod, but every time someone told me a story like that, I wrote it down. I didn't realize I was building a pattern until last fall, when I decided to visit 3 of those places myself. 3 campgrounds scattered across the U.S., each with a reputation for silence that didn't sit right. The first was Cedar Hollow, Kentucky. I rolled in on a warm October evening, fog sliding like breath between the trees. There were no other vans, no rangers, not even a fee box, just an old sign nailed to a post that said closed for maintenance. But the road was open, and I've never been great at following rules. The woods pressed tight around the gravel lot. You could smell rot, but not the bad kind, the kind that smells sweet like fruit gone to sleep. I parked near the edge, cut the engine, and let the silence settle. There's a difference between quiet and empty. Quiet means the forest is resting. Empty means something told it to leave. Cedar Hollow was empty. I remember thinking the trees looked wrong, like they were leaning towards something in the middle of the clearing. I set up my small campfire, pulled out my recorder, and started talking. I always start my entries the same way: Eli Moran, field log. The tape crackled, my voice bounced back, but this time I heard another voice under it, something repeating me, half a beat behind. I paused. Nothing, just the pop of wood. Then, softer than the breeze, the recording whispered back, field log. I laughed it off. Must have been a glitch, I said. That's what you do out there. You explain away the things that don't make sense. But the longer I stayed, the harder it was to keep explaining. Around midnight, the fire began to hiss. Not die, just hiss, like something wet was moving beneath it. The air turned heavy. I swear I could feel the weight of the ground shift, like the dirt itself was breathing. I turned on my flashlight, shone it toward the trees, and saw shapes, not people, not animals, but outlines in the fog. They didn't move. They just stayed, watching. The human brain has a trick for this. It fills in faces where there are none. But I've spent years outdoors. I know what's real. And what I saw that night wasn't my imagination. When dawn came, my fire was gone, not burned out, just gone. No ashes. Just cold, damp soil and a perfect circle of green moss that hadn't been there before. I packed fast. When I looked back from the road, every tree in the clearing leaned toward where I'd slept, like they were looking. I didn't share that footage for months, but when I finally played it, I noticed something else. Whenever I said my name, the background audio warped, like static trying to form a word. I slowed it down, filtered it, and underneath, a whisper, "Stay." That's the thing about these places. They don't want you to leave. The second campground was in Wyoming, near the Tetons, a place locals call Black Elk Basin, though no map labels it. I'd been told about it by a retired park ranger named Lewis, who once worked Yellowstone's boundary roads. He said hikers vanished there in the 80s. 4 of them, same month, all last seen walking toward the basin. No search teams ever found their tents, but their license plates were discovered nailed to a pine years later. When I asked why no one talks about it, Lewis said something I'll never forget. Because the forest wants to be left alone. I should have listened. The drive up was punishing, unpaved switchbacks, drop-offs that swallowed sunlight. I reached the clearing near dusk again. That seems to be when these things find you. My van idled while I scanned the tree line. Nothing moved, but the sound. God, the sound. It wasn't the usual forest noise. It was hollow, like wind blowing through a mouth instead of branches. That night, as I cooked over my little propane stove, I saw lights flicker down the slope. 3 of them, in a line, maybe flashlights. I assumed it was a family or hikers, but as they came closer, I realized they weren't moving like people. They'd flare, vanish, reappear 20 feet away. When the nearest one reached the base of the clearing, I saw it wasn't light at all. It was reflection, like eyes, huge and low to the ground. I shut off the stove. Everything went still. Then a whistle, long, low, human. It came from the woods, maybe 30 yards away. I called out, "Hello?" Another whistle answered. Same pitch, same rhythm, perfect mimicry. I raised my light, heart hammering, but there was nothing. Just a cold mist rising from the ground, catching the beam. I didn't sleep that night. Around 3 a.m., the whistling stopped. I heard movement then, slow steps circling my van, crunching the frost. A hand brushed the window, or what I thought was a hand. By morning, I decided I was done chasing legends. But before I left, I stepped outside and found something hanging from my rearview mirror, a metal plate, rusted, with numbers barely visible. When I wiped it clean, I saw what was carved into it, WY 1983. That was the year those 4 hikers disappeared. I drove for hours without stopping, afraid that if I looked back, I'd see those lights again. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the smell. Wet iron, like blood mixed with rain. My clothes carried it. My van carried it. And sometimes, when I turned the key, my radio would crackle to life with that same whistle. Always the same pitch, always the same rhythm. I told myself that was it, that I'd seen enough. But you can't walk away once you've heard the forest call your name. And that's what happened at the 3rd site, Pine Run, up in Northern California. That's where everything came together, where I finally understood what all these campgrounds were hiding. By the time I reached Pine Run, I wasn't chasing stories anymore. I was chasing closure. There's a difference between curiosity and obsession, but that line disappears once the unknown looks back at you. I told myself I just wanted to prove it was all in my head, that there was nothing connecting Cedar Hollow, Black Elk Basin, and whatever waited in the pines of Northern California. But deep down, I think I already knew. I wasn't looking for proof. I was looking for recognition. You ever get the feeling a place remembers you? Like it's been waiting for you to come back, even if you've never been there before? That's what Pine Run felt like. It sat just off an abandoned logging road north of Redding. No signs, no gates. Just a break in the trees that opened to a stretch of flattened earth the locals used for dumping gravel. The only reason I knew it was once a campground was the half-buried post by the tree line with faded letters. Site 12. Nothing else. Not a picnic table, not a fire ring, just silence so thick it hummed. I parked my Volkswagen by a crooked stump and turned off the engine. The ticking of cooling metal echoed like a heartbeat. I waited for the usual forest sounds to fill in, the distant chatter of birds, the creak of branches, but nothing came. It was like stepping into a photograph of silence. The air had a strange texture that night, cold but not clean, like there was weight to it, a residue. I stepped out, stretched, looked up at the sky. No stars, just the faint outline of clouds moving too fast, like time was rushing ahead without me. I lit my lantern and set up the mic. The first words that left my mouth trembled before I even realized it. Eli Moran, field log, Pine Run Campground, if you can still call it that. Feels like standing in the pause between heartbeats. The recorder picked up a faint ringing, feedback maybe, but when I listened closer, it sounded like wind blowing through a bottle. A hollow tone that seemed to rise and fall in rhythm with my breath. I told myself it was just the mic catching interference, but the truth was I could feel it vibrating in my chest. I should have left then. But the thing about fear is, it only feels manageable when you can name it. And I couldn't name this yet. By 10 p.m., I'd started hearing movement from the ridge, soft steps crunching pine needles, stopping whenever I turned my light that way. I called out once, twice, no answer. Then at 10:23, my camera timestamp proved it. A voice answered. It sounded like me. Not someone mimicking me. Me. Same pitch, same tired rasp, same hesitation. I froze, staring into the dark. Then it said, exactly how I would have, Eli Moran, field log. I dropped the flashlight. The beam rolled through the brush, catching a figure half hidden between the trees. My body refused to move. Every nerve screamed to run, but my brain was still processing what I was seeing. Because the figure, it was me. Not a reflection, not a shadow. Me, standing where no mirror could be, staring back. His eyes were wrong, though, hollow, like someone had scooped out the light behind them. He tilted his head, and in my own voice, he said, "You're late." I don't remember how long I stood there before my legs worked again. I stumbled backward, tripping over my gear. When I looked up, he was gone. The forest was just forest again. But the air had changed. It wasn't still anymore. It was listening. I packed the mic, shoved everything into the van, and turned the key. Nothing. No click, no turnover, just dead silence. I hit the dash, tried again. Then I noticed something outside the windshield. Every tree in front of me was bending, slowly, as if pushed by wind, except there was no wind. They were all leaning toward the van, like before in Kentucky. Only now it wasn't just one clearing, it was the whole forest shifting to face me. Then I heard the first knock, soft, on the back hatch, then another, and another. The rhythm steady, deliberate. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. I tried the ignition again. This time it coughed alive. The headlights flared, cutting across the dirt road. For a split second, I saw figures between the trees, dozens of them, all still, all watching, faces too blurred to be human, but shapes unmistakably so. When I threw the van into gear, the radio came on by itself. Static, then that same whistle from Wyoming. Long, low, human. I drove blind, bouncing down the unmarked road until the pines thinned and the stars finally reappeared. Only then did I realize my hands were bleeding, from gripping the wheel too tight, or from something else, I don't know. I didn't stop until I hit the main highway, and even then I kept checking the rearview mirror. The trees on the horizon still looked like they were leaning toward me. A week later, back home in Oregon, I decided to listen to the recording from that night. It took me hours to work up the courage. The file opened fine, but the first 30 seconds were blank. Then came the sound of my voice, tired, strained. Eli Moran, field log, Pine Run Campground. And over it, faintly, another layer of audio, someone whispering behind me. I boosted the gain, filtered the static, slowed it down. The whisper wasn't words at first, just fragments of breath, like someone trying to speak underwater. But then it formed 3 sentences, clear enough to feel the weight of them in my chest. You came back. We kept your voice. Now leave it here. The last 5 seconds were nothing but wind, except it wasn't wind. It was that hollow tone again, the one that pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. That's when I realized what these places were. They weren't haunted. They were collecting, not souls, not bodies, voices. Every story I'd ever heard about missing campers, vanished hikers, silent forests, they weren't random. They were offerings. and I'd been recording them all, feeding the thing that waits in the quiet. I haven't camped since. I can't even sleep with my windows open anymore. Some nights I still play back the tapes, hoping to hear something human again. But every time I do, the same sound creeps in beneath my voice, the tone that feels like breath held too long. And once, just once, I heard something else. A voice that wasn't mine this time. A woman's, soft and broken, whispering my name. Eli, don't leave us here. I shut it off. I haven't touched the recorder since, but sometimes when I'm driving past tree lines at night, I'll catch glimpses of my reflection in the glass, just a trick of headlights maybe. Except, lately, it doesn't always move when I do. I stopped recording after Pine Run. For the first time in my life, I didn't want proof. I wanted silence. But silence, it turns out, doesn't mean peace. It just means you can finally hear what's been whispering underneath everything. I spent the winter parked near the Oregon coast, sleeping inside the van every night, too scared to step outside after dark. It's funny how easily fear becomes routine, how the human mind adjusts even to terror if it means avoiding truth. I told myself I was resting, recovering, but deep down, I knew I was hiding. Not from a ghost or a person, but from the idea that something out there had learned my name. You know how when you've been through something traumatic, you start noticing patterns in ordinary things? That's what happened next. Every forest I passed, every patch of pine seemed to be leaning toward the road. I'd see my reflection in the window at night and swear it blinked half a second too late. Once, at a gas station outside Crescent City, the radio behind the counter started playing an old field log from my channel, my voice talking about Cedar Hollow. The cashier didn't even notice. He was humming along like it was any other song. That's when I realized this wasn't over. Whatever had followed me out of those campgrounds hadn't stayed behind. It had moved in. It started small. Audio glitches, shadows that didn't match the light. Then, one night in February, I woke to the sound of knocking again. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. I froze in my sleeping bag, every muscle wired with that primal electricity that says run. But where do you run when you live inside your fear? I turned on the lantern. The inside of the van was empty. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unzip the door. I stepped outside and saw it, something carved into the dirt behind my tires. Letters, shallow but unmistakable, stay. My breath fogged the air. I wanted to tell myself it was a prank, that someone had followed me from a previous stop, but there were no footprints, just my own. That's when it hit me. What if the thing that follows you doesn't come after you at all? What if it waits inside you until the conditions are right? What if every fear we have of the wilderness isn't about what's hiding in the dark, but about what the dark pulls out from inside us? I drove for hours that night until I found myself back inland, climbing toward the mountains without realizing it. The GPS kept losing signal, rerouting, redrawing the same stretch of road over and over. And then, suddenly, there it was again. The sign. Site 12. At first I laughed. The sound came out cracked, like static. No, I said out loud, not again. I hadn't told anyone about that sign. No one knew that name but me. I parked the van at the edge of the clearing and got out. The forest was quieter than before, but not empty. The air buzzed, low and constant, like a held breath. And somewhere deeper in the trees, something was humming. A faint mechanical sound, rhythmic, familiar. It took me a moment to recognize it. It was my own voice, looping through a broken speaker. The field log from Pine Run. I followed the sound until I reached a fallen pine. My old recorder sat on the trunk, blinking red, battery still alive. I hadn't seen it since the night I ran. I pressed play. Static. Wind. Then the words that froze my lungs. You came back. We kept your voice. Now leave it here. And underneath, barely audible, 100 whispers, different tones, different breaths, all overlapping. The missing voices of the ones who'd vanished, some crying, some laughing, some just breathing. It was like the forest was replaying them. That's when I saw the figures again. Between the trees. This time I didn't run. I just stood there staring, realizing they weren't ghosts, they were echoes. Residual impressions trapped inside sound like grooves on a record replaying memory. Every campground I'd visited, every log I'd made, every sound I'd captured, it had all been part of this system, a loop. These places were feeding off memory, replaying fear until someone brought new sound to it, until I brought it. I'd been their carrier. The realization broke me open. My knees hit the dirt. I don't know how long I stayed like that, shaking, whispering to no one. But when I finally looked up, the figures were gone. The recorder light was off. The forest was still. I walked back to the van in a trance. My body felt hollow, like the sound had drained everything human out of me. Before starting the engine, I turned to the trees one last time. "I'm done," I said. "You can keep my voice." And for the first time in months, the forest answered. Not with whispers, not with echoes, with quiet, real, peaceful quiet. When I turned the key, the engine started without a hitch. I drove until sunrise, until the highway opened wide beneath a sky washed clean by dawn. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I was something worse, emptied. But that emptiness felt like freedom. It's been a year since Pine Run. I don't make recordings anymore. I still live in the van, but now I keep moving. No repeats, no revisits, no second nights in the same place. Sometimes I pass through old campgrounds, the places that used to hum with other travelers, now silent. And every now and then I see the faint remains of words carved into the dirt, or hear the far-off sound of a whistle I know too well. But I don't stop, because I've learned something about mystery. It doesn't need to be solved to be respected. Some stories should stay unfinished. Some silences should stay unrecorded. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone listening, it's this. When the woods go quiet, don't lean in to listen. Back away. Because the moment you try to hear what's waiting in that silence, it hears you too. And once it knows your voice, you'll never camp in peace again.